So I'm starting a new painting today. I will share with students a lesson that I gave on drawing this particular image. So the things that we were talking about in the past on why I would do one painting over another is, what attracted me to this particular painting. And what I truly loved about it was the row of these pink trees against that blue mountain. And then the feeling of the new green grass in between the plowed dirt areas. And so this painting has a little sense of perspective to it. We've got some close things that go off into the distance. And then as we develop this and go, I love this painting, what would I do different? What did I really want to emphasize about it? I felt like I wanted the mountain to go bigger, and I wanted these trees to go a little bit bigger as well. This is a very old peach orchard, and it's been pruned and pruned and pruned. And so we have these very thick branches, then with little small branches coming off the top of them. I think we can sort of emphasize a little more, some height on it. I know that these commercial orchards, they prune them so that they can get to the fruit easier, but it doesn't always look quite as pretty. So we can change things. So I've done a drawing. And in the drawing, we've taken the mountain quite a bit higher in the piece, and we've taken these trees higher and a little lower, and then moved this green piece over some. So from this drawing, I've done a transfer with my graphite transfer paper onto the piece, and then came back in and darkened some of the areas so that I could see a little bit more of the detail that I put in. So we have mountain coming up fairly high. We've got the trees working through here, and I'm seeing that I need to do a little bit of erasing because I changed some things from what my graphite transfer paper was, and I want to get that out of here now while the paper is absolutely dry. And so if I get some of these pieces that I've changed off of here while the paper is dry, I can get it. You do not want to do any erasing after it's wet. When it totally dries later and you've done some painting on here, you will be able to erase, but not quite as well as you can now before you've done any painting at all. Okay, so we've got shadows coming across, we've got tree trunks, we've got an area of pink, we've got an area of blue. So now I have to decide, how am I going to approach this? Am I going to do an underwash and throw down some colors? Am I going to paint this in totally separate pieces? Am I going to think about doing some resist up in the top here to grab some of those beautiful branches of pink that come up behind that mountain? Or am I going to carefully paint around all of those in the end? So before I make that decision, I think my first decision is that I want to do an underwash on this, just to get that beautiful soft feeling of that pink going in there. I won't do the mountain on that first wash. I'll do the pink and maybe some of the green, and then we'll see from there. So first step, if I'm going to do that, is to mix up my paint. And that's my other decision. What color am I going to use for that pink? I have quinacridone rose here. It's a nice cool red, which that pink to me isn't a very cool red. If I went in with a warmer red like a cadmium or a vermilion, those are orangish reds, and I don't think, then you wouldn't get the pink you want out of it. Now, there is one other color, so this actually is could be quite nice. There is one other color available. It has a possibility of maybe fading in the long term, and this is a color that's called Opera. And so Opera, it's actually not showing itself as being a lot different than my quinacridone rose now. It's a little brighter pink. I could use a combination of the two in here, which I think maybe I will. The Opera dries maybe a little brighter pink than the quinacridone rose does. So But you do want a, what I would call a cool red for this so that you get a pretty pink. And we're not going to add any other color into it yet. We might in the shadows later, but to start with, I just want a nice amount of that. And oh, you know what? I'm going to have to stop for a minute because I needed to have 2 things of water here. I have now gotten my water dirty. So I'm going to stop for a minute, go get some more water, and then continue. All right, I'm back. I realized that I had used my other water to mix the pink, and then that ended up with pink water. It wouldn't matter except for we have a very fresh green here, and these two are opposite colors. If I had pink underneath of this green, it would dull it down, and you wouldn't get that really fresh color of the spring green. So now, let's go ahead and get this wetted down. Since I want those pinks to go on fairly loosely to start with, I want this wet enough that there is a sheen all over it, but the water is not actually running off. So, you know, when you're doing a wet and wet wash, this is always the consideration: how wet do I have it? If I have it where the water is just pouring off of here, it will bleed all over the place and make a very smooth wash, but a very dispersed wash of colors. And if I don't want it quite that that loose, I want to have it a little bit tighter feeling, a little more control of where that water is going. I'm just looking at this, making sure if I look at it sideways, I can see the dry spots. So just want this very evenly spread through here. Okay, I think I've got that. Now, so we're going to be putting on, which this brush will work, we're going to be putting on this pink. And now I don't have to worry about those black tree trunks yet, because they are going to be dark and they'll just spread in there. So I'm just dropping this on so that we get the sort of the feeling of flowers here. And so come on down into there. And I want some of this to be a little bit lighter. Let's try some of that opera pink and see if it actually looks a little different in here. This front tree in particular, if we want to have a brighter color in it. And I could also try doing these with my sponge. Let's just do some of this with the sponge. It's maybe a little more uneven with the sponge. Oh yeah, I'm liking that. I'm getting some little smaller pieces in there, a little uneven feeling of that pink running through here. And maybe some bits of it come down into here. A little bit more thicker paint. And then maybe a few more drops with my brush. I had wet that sponge just a little bit so the paint went down a little thinner with that. And now as this dries just a little bit, I could come in and do some more darkening in that. And I've kept my paint, my my water clean. And now I need to mix some green, and I had originally was going to use one of these other areas, but let me take this one to mix my green in. So I'm thinking sap green, but I'm also seeing some paler yellow than sap green is. So let's mix the sap green. and then maybe add a little more of this leaf green to it. So it'll make it a little paler, and then have this leaf green available as a lighter piece to put in there. And then I also have some darker green here that I had mixed up that I could use as some of the darker passages in there. Just get enough water into that mixture that it is about the consistency of whole milk. So both of these are about the consistency of whole milk. The leaf green one will be a little bit thicker than that. Okay, and I wanted to start with my lighter version, so I'm going to clean that brush out, dry it a little bit on my rag, and just sort of patting it down onto the rag to take a little bit of that water off, and then grab into my mixture that was sap green with a little bit of that leaf green, a little yellower green. And if you don't have that yellower green, just add a little bit of like New Gamboge or Aurelian yellow to it to lighten it up some. So I'm seeing, this is it's not the paint, the page, or my paper is drying fairly quickly, and so this is not going to move very much. Which is a good in many ways. So we're just getting some green down here to start with, and then I'll start adding more to it. And maybe a little horizontal feel to those colors. Now let's get some of this lighter green into here just to make this a little more. And I have to be a little careful about putting this down too thick, because green and yellow are both colors that if you put them down too thick, they start getting very heavy and bound up looking. Now this can come a little wider here. So I need to be careful about making this too thick here. And then we're going to come in with a little more darker green over here, medium green over here, and just sort of do some grassy movement with it. Take that right down to my edge there. Oh, and this can continue right on out that way. We want this whole thing that this is getting wider here and going narrower toward the back. And then let's just right along the edge of that where there's some height to the grass, let's put a little bit of the darker in, and maybe some running across through here. And let it sort of find some of those edges. There's actually a shadow from this tree running across through here, so let's let that, and this dark one here, these are both sort of shadows running across through there, but there's a little darkness right on the edge of that grass to give it the feeling that maybe it's got some height to it. And now I think this is dry enough now that I can actually come in and get a few of these pieces of green back in here. And let me just soften that just a little bit. I want to lighten it just a hair, get a little more yellow into it. And if I've made these a little bit too wide, I can add the brown in on top of them and sort of knock them down some. And then I'm just seeing some little feeling of sort of green in between that brown. So let me just put some of that in. There's more green back in here between these trees too. The trees are going to go dark, so I can actually paint that right over and then just take that up onto the trees just a little bit. What that gives for me is that I don't then have to paint absolutely perfect into those trees, and this will give me a nice little green background in there. All right, and then maybe another little green line back in here, and I like this one. Let's do that same thing where we bring that up onto that tree just a little bit. That will go black eventually, but for right now, those little feeling of green lines. And maybe we'll just add a little feeling of green over in here that's going to turn brown. And I might be at that point, I think now I can come in with a little more paint in here on the sponge now that this is dried some, and get just some darker bits in here to get that feeling of flowers. So you don't want to lose all that light, but it needs some dark as well to make it work. And maybe there's some that goes up out into that blue. And then we'll have to make a decision. One possibility that I've got here is to actually, once this dries, is to do some some masking fluid over the edges of this. Or when I come to paint that mountain, I can come in and paint around all of those. Those trees, just looking at my thing, these trees in the background are dark. They're going to go in on top afterwards. All the tree trunks are dark. They're going to come in afterwards. Once this dries a little tiny bit more, I can come in and paint some more of this brown in the alleyways between. So there's a point when this is damp but not wet, and at that point I can, and I just seeing this, I want to put just a little more feeling of some of these flowers over in here. I like what's happening with this sponge. So I've probably shown this to you before, but it's a sea sponge with a very ragged edge to it. Very nice for doing this kind of texture stuff. If I didn't have this, I would need to come in with my brush and just try and be uneven and do some little brush marks, which I'll show you just a little bit, because we want a few of those as well. So with the tip of my brush with this paint, I can come in and I can do some uneven marks to get some of those flowers. And you know, some of these ones that go up in these little stems at the top. I don't have quite enough paint on this brush to make this work properly. Let me just get a little more paint on the brush, dampen my brush a little bit more, get a little more paint on it. Ah, yeah, that's working better. Depending on how hard I press down with that, depends on whether it makes a little round spot or if it makes a little triangle that comes down. Okay, so do I want to do the brown now or let it dry? You know, I think that the safest thing is going to be to let this dry. Then I come back in and I can paint those browns in. I can come back in and I can paint the sky and then the mountains. So we're going to let it dry at this point, and then we'll go forward from there.